Hi everyone. So this is the first of our sort of online tutorials, and in this I'm going to show you how to build our drum kit sample instrument. I'm going to be using Pro Tools and the sampling software, the TX16WX. If I've put a link to a free download for that sampling software, and it will work in pretty much every DAW. So that could be Pro Tools, Logic, Reaper. I'm going to be using Pro Tools today, but if I click on our sampling page on Moodle, just to let you know, there's the link for the free version of the sampling software, and the free version does everything that you really need. There's also a link to Reaper, which is effectively free, and there's a link to Pro Tools First, which is the sort of free version of Pro Tools. It's limited in some respects. I think sort of 16 tracks of audio and so on, but actually for what we need to do, it should work perfectly well. Obviously, if you use Logic as well, this will definitely work. So I have already downloaded the drum kit samples and the Smooth Criminal MIDI file, and that's what we're going to be using today. So I'm going to open a new Pro Tools session. I'll just call it sampling test. Let me see, yeah, 44.1 and 24-bit, that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to create that. And so what pops up is our edit window, which is obviously empty at the moment because we've got nothing in there. We've got no audio channels, we've got no instrument channels, we've got nothing. We can take a look at our mix window, and obviously we don't have anything in there at the moment. To switch between the two, on a Mac, the shortcut between to switch between mix and edit is just Command plus. On a Windows machine, I think it's Control plus, just a nice simple one for you there. So, as I said, I've already downloaded it, so if I go up to my downloads here, and I'm just going to close a few things so that it becomes a bit easier to see. But I've got Smooth Criminal MIDI there. And so what I'm going to do is go back to Pro Tools. I know where it is anyway, that's good. I'll go back to Pro Tools and File and Import MIDI. And it's already said there in download, so I'm going to choose that one. Those are both the same, I just downloaded it twice by mistake. Okay, so I'm going to press open, and it'll ask me, do I want all of the new tracks to be instrument tracks? I do. I want it to start at the start of the session, and I want to import tempo and key signature from MIDI file. So I press OK. And so all of the MIDI information for each track is imported, but I don't know if you can tell, hopefully you can, that all of these tracks are currently grayed out. And if we look here, we have our instrument view and our inserts there. If you want more or less, just to the left at the top here, it says Edit Window View Selector, and I can drop down, so I could have a look at, I can see all of these things. I could look at my sends, and it adds that there. I don't need those at the moment, so I'll take those off. But at the moment, I've got an instrument and the inserts there. So, because it's grayed out, we're going to obviously concentrate on the drums at the moment. So let me do this and just highlight the drums. So at the moment, it's grayed out because it doesn't have an output. So what we need to do is give it an instrument to play through. So I'm going to choose, as you might have guessed, our TX16WX software sampler. And whilst it just thinks about that. Okay, that's great. I'm just going to close it for a second. And then what I need to do there is choose an output. Channel 1, and all of a sudden it's there. Now if you're using Logic, Logic will do this automatically. Reaper, it'll be similar to Pro Tools in that you would need to kind of select an instrument and give it a valid output. But That's great. If I were to press play, you would see the keys being triggered in the sampler, but nothing coming out because we haven't assigned any samples to those keys. So that's what we need to do next. If I go to Finder, I've got my tutorial drum kit folders there. So we have a folder for crash samples, hi-hat samples, kick samples, ride, snare, splash and toms. We also have a drum chart here. So if I just open that, and this tells us which keys we need to assign our samples to. Oh, there it is, sorry. So here we have an Excel chart, and it says kick assigned to C1. Obviously Microsoft wants to update, we're right in the middle of something. Kick, snare to C sharp 1, snare right to D1, snares off to D sharp 1, and so on. And so that just tells us which keys to assign it to. Now, I'll say this now, and I'll also say it again later when we start building the sample instrument, because certain manufacturers, and depending on the software and the programs or the hardware that you're using, occasionally you can get discrepancies between the octaves. So it depends on which C note the manufacturer deems to be middle C. It could be C2 or C3. I know that sounds vaguely ridiculous, but trust me, that's the case. So in Logic, this is absolutely right. In Pro Tools, we have to shift everything up an octave. So that should be C2. That should be C sharp 2. That should be D2, and so on. Okay, so just bear that in mind and watch out for it, because otherwise you won't get everything triggering in the right order. So back to Pro Tools. I'm going to open up my sampler again, and I'm going to start with my bass drum samples. Let's go. So I'm going to highlight all of the WAVs. Don't worry about the Reaper files there. That's just from an earlier thing I did. It's these WAVs there. Now it's got velocity kick V1, which is velocity 1, kick V2, which is velocity 2, kick V3, velocity 3, and V4, which obviously is velocity 4. And just beside velocity 1, we've got a P, then an MF, then an F, and then a double F. And they're the Italian dynamic terms. So piano, mezzo forte, forte, fortissimo. Effectively quiet, moderately loud, loud, and very loud. So let me drag these in now to our sampler. So that's created a new program for us, which is fine. That's Pro Tools. Okay, so that's great. We've got samples. And you can hear it being triggered, and you can hear the pitch shifting of the sampler. So it's doing its job. And if you see here, so C minus 1, and you can see C minus 1 there, and that is the low key range. So that means what's the lowest key, piano key, that will trigger the sample. High K is which is the highest key that will trigger the sample, and you can see there it's C9. If we go back to our Excel sheet, so we're saying that the kick should only be triggered by C1. Now remember what I said. Actually, in Pro Tools, we need to shift that up to C2. In Logic, it would probably be fine. So just bear that in mind. If things aren't working, it might just be because of discrepancy between manufacturers of the MIDI note value of C, of middle C. So I'm going to change that and make it to C2. Oh, sorry. C2, just as a reminder, okay? So now we can do this, a number of ways, but what I am going to do is highlight all of these samples here, and then I'm going to shift them across. We can actually zoom in. Let me do that first. Okay, and that was just there. Highlight all these, move across, and then okay, and that stops just on the edge of C2. And now I'm going to do the same thing across there and move it down. Just get that so we can see it. Great. And so now that should be triggered by C2. And you can hear it doesn't quite sound right. Now actually that's because the root is set at C4, and you can see it's highlighted there for all of these. And what that means is the sample bases the pitch adjustment, so the sampler bases the pitch adjustment it makes on each sample based on the root note. So that's too high. So what we need to do is individually change these. To C2. 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 Oh dear me, what have I done there? Let's sort that out. And then the last one, C2. Great, and now let me just, sorry. You can hear something sounds a bit more like a bass drum that we'd expect. Okay, so hopefully that has made sense so far. Now, what the sample instrument has done really, really handily for us is it's imported all of these four and it's immediately put them in velocity order. So you can see our first one, which is piano, velocity 1, there. It's got low velocity and high velocity, and this is the velocity range. And so, remember we talked about velocity being effectively the attack, or how hard you would press a key, or if you remember the drum sample pad that I've used, how hard you hit that sample pad. So the low velocity, the quietest sample is triggered by a velocity range of 0 to 30. We don't want any crossover between samples, so the next sample is set set to have a velocity between 31 and 61. The next one between 62 and 92, and then our final one between 93 and 127, which is our maximum MIDI value. Okay, now that's great and really handy that the sampler's done it. If I now go on to our next sample, which would be, in fact, let's just look at our Excel chart again. So snare left, which is C#1, but it's actually C#2, remember, in this instance. I'm going to drag our snare samples in, and it won't do it this time. I'm going to guarantee it, but I will guarantee nothing, but let's see. So if I close my kick, and I go for snare, and I look at, let me just double check, which one is it? Snare left we need first. So let's find snare left here, there we are. Snare left, velocity 1, velocity 2, velocity 3, velocity 4, and drag them in. And go back to Pro Tools. So it's done a slightly odd thing, and it's put them completely separate. Now, let's highlight our first sample, which is velocity 1. And if you remember, we wanted it to be from 0 to 30. So let's change the velocity first, 0 to 30. And you can see it's come down in the velocity range. And we also know that we want it to just be triggered by C#2. The root note is missing at the moment, so we need to sort that out in a minute. So now I'm just going to drag that down, drag it onto C#2 again. Make sure the range, the low key range and high key range is set to C#2, but the velocity isn't right because we need that to be 31 61. Let's find our next sample. Drag it down. Make sure the key range is set to C#2 and C#2 there. And we need that to, now our low velocity for this third sample needs to be 62. And we're going to go up to 92. And that should leave a gap at the top for our final sample, which I'll drag straight across. I'm doing this zoomed in, so hopefully it'll be clearer for you guys. And there we go. Drag the key range so it's just being triggered by C#2, and then alter that velocity. We know that the high velocity has to be 127 because it's the maximum, which is fine. And then we need that to avoid any crossover with the high velocity of sample 3. We're going to make that 93. And there you go. So it all matches. Now, if we've got a bass drum and a snare drum. There you go. Okay. So what you guys need to do is now import all of those samples, being very, very careful that you get them in the right order. So going from C2 to C#2 to D2 and so on, and it'll go all the way up, and you should have an octave and a bit worth of instruments. It's time consuming, but it's worth doing. Before I forget, and before I go any further, as you do each group of samples, so snare left for example here, what you do need is to make sure that the root note is right. Oh, sorry. So C#2, remember we said. So because I can't remember what the hashtag is on a Mac, I'm just going to type in C2 and then move right up it, because obviously we want. Oh. There we go. So we want to set it to C#2. In fact, why don't we do that? Oh. C#2. So I'm doing a slightly cumbersome way here because actually I can't remember the shortcut for the sharp, but this is one way of doing it. I'm sure you'll find a faster workflow than I am at the moment. C2. Make sure they're all set to C#2, and then what you'll get is the appropriate pitch shift or not pitch shift, depending on what you want. But for this drum kit, we don't. We want to set the low key range, the high key range to be exactly the same as the root. Okay, now there is lots of other bits of functionality in this, but that's all we need to do for this. So what I will do is now, in the Blue Peter fashion, close that down and close this, because actually, don't say. Just wait for Pro Tools to open this, and I'll open my sample. And what I have, if I just zoom in slightly for you, the wrong way, is one I made earlier. I think actually I've got a couple missing, so let's just put those in just to finish it off. Obviously I'm skipping a few steps that I've done, but I didn't think you'd want to watch me build it all bit by bit. Thought that might be a bit weird. So I think we go up to the right. Let me just have a quick look. So we've got ride bell. So the next one along is ride tip, which is going to be E2. That's right. Okay, so let's do ride tip. Let me find that. Ride tip. Move that out of the way so we can see what's happening. Okay. So same thing. I'm just going to find the end of my first sample. Get that out of the way slightly. Get that down. So the key range is E3 now to E3. Remember, it's shifted up because of the discrepancy between those manufacturers. I'm going to put that 0 to 30. Get my next one, bring it all the way down. Make sure the key range is right, E2 to E2. And then this, remember the we wanted 31 to 61. um, 62 to 92, because that means that we're not crossing over between samples and have cross triggering. And I'll find the one. I mean, you can zoom out to this, should probably make it slightly quicker, but at least you can see what I'm doing here. And there we go. So the key range is right, and then we just want to make sure that our value there is 93. Great, and we want to make sure that the root note is E3. Okay, so we're nearly there. I think we've got what we've got left: crash and splash. So let's do it. It's worth doing. Let's get the Pro Tools up. Crash. We have. And let me just make sure we know exactly which note is being triggered by. F2, F3. Remember. Let's just check and change those so that we remember. Okay. Back to Finder and Pro Tools. Okay. So I'm going to drag those in there. Great. So there we go, being triggered by F2, and let's sort the velocity out. Drag that down, make sure the key range is right. It's repetitive, remember guys, but it works is the point. So it's a good exercise if nothing else. And this will give us our first sampler instrument, which is great. And this works in exactly the same way, depending on, irrespective of which DAW you use, because the sampling software is still the same. Okay. And we want 62 down here. We want 92, and then across. Bring it all the way down. Make sure the key range is right, so it's being triggered by F3 and only F3, and then we want 93 to 127. Great. Let's sort out the root note. F3. Cool, okay. And we've got one more left to do, which is our splash, I think. Splash, yeah, and just as a reminder, that's actually F sharp 3. Okay, great. Let's find our splash. Okay. Great, F sharp 3. So we'll take the velocities. $31 to $61. We're nearly there. We are nearly there. $62, $92, and our final one $93. And let's just make sure we do this now. So remember, sorry, I'm probably doing it, not helping you guys understand this properly because I can't get the hashtag to work on here, but I'm just going back and then skipping up so that the root note is right. Okay, cool. So let's zoom out slightly, and it should look something like that. Yeah, similar to that. Now, there's one slight difference. I don't know if you can see there. Let's zoom in ever so slightly. I've made a slight change to my kick drum in that I have extended it so that the key range is actually B1 to C2. And a little tip for you is the MIDI information that's in the Smooth Criminal actually includes a B1. So yours will look something like that. I'm just going to extend it, and I think you guys should too, and I've obviously messed that up. I'm going to extend it so that all those velocities are triggered by B1 as well. And because the root note is set to C2, you should hear, it's very difficult to tell, but you'll hear a slight pitch difference. So that's great. It's MIDI channel 1, our output 1. That's absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is now close that. I should add, you should probably definitely save all of these before you do anything. You can assign this, by the way, to different. You can, if you've got lots of different samplers open, you can choose between this and open up the bass track, the keyboard track, and then input different samples into that. So it's an easier way to kind of get around. If you go to settings and just make sure that save waves in project, and then if you, save all waves in FXB as well. I would tick that. And then save settings there. Hopefully, just make sure you save everything everywhere, basically, and it means that you've got everything. It's always worth testing, just opening it up again, make sure it's still there. So if I close that, and well, it's the only thing that isn't grayed out anyway, but I'll solo it just to prove the point. I'll turn that up. So hopefully we should have, fingers crossed, a drum kit that now sounds a bit like a drum kit. Okay, now actually, if I go back, to Pro Tools and open up this, sounds a bit tinny. I wonder if we should change the roots. Let's change this to C1, 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 and let's see what difference that makes. Cool. And you can highlight all of these, by the way. I mean, your root notes don't change, but you can start shifting stuff around and moving. I wouldn't necessarily, because obviously now the wrong samples are being triggered by the wrong keys. So I'm just going to move that back up. Okay? And you have a drum kit that works. I'm just going to close that. Now the inserts, obviously you've got your instrument there, but the inserts are basically, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with, with stuff that you've done in recording tech. Inserts are where we can now insert different plugins or effects. So after the instrument, I'm just going to put, let's put an EQ, and let's go for 7 band. And this allows us to sort of alter the EQ of 7 different sort of bands or parts of the frequency range. So let's try that. Now, say I want to add a little bass drum, or low end rather. And you can filter it so you get all sorts of slightly odd and unusual effects, and put it back to the way it was. So we could put an EQ there. Let me stop that and get rid of it. Now, actually, if I click just to the left of it, I'm going to stick some reverb on it. Let's choose one of the presets. Let's go for something ridiculous, shall we? Let's go for a large church. I'm pretty much guarantee this is not going to sound appropriate, but you'll hopefully get the idea. And if we alter the mix between dry signal and wet signal, now feels like overkill to me, but you can experiment with that, and you can just start thinking about how you want that drums to sound, those drum samples to sound. So that's how we build our first drum kit sampler instrument. There are lots of other things you can do. You don't necessarily want tons and tons of plugins on each channel because it will eat up your processing power. So we might look at group processing things as we go along. But in terms of building a sampler instrument, that's how you do it. And I will be able to answer any questions that you have in our tutorials as we go along. Okay, great. And obviously, don't forget to save everything. As you might imagine, on a Mac, the shortcut for save is Command S. Just get in the habit of doing that every 2 minutes. Every time you do something, press Command S at the end, and you'll thank me for it in the end. Okay, thanks guys.